Good evening. At 6 o'clock, I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is a joint meeting between the Manitou Springs City Council and the Manitou Springs Planning Commission. It's a work session for October the 26th, 2021. I'll go ahead and start with a roll call of council. Councilmember Bremner.
Present.
Councilmember Wolf. Mayor Pro Tem.
Present.
The mayor's here. Councilmember Chandler. Councilmember Johnson.
Here.
And Mr. Shada is likely to appear in a few minutes. Okay. And Alan, if you would call roll for the Planning Commission, please.
Commissioner Reagan,
Present.
Commissioner Casey,
Here.
Commissioner Storm,
Here.
Commissioner Latimer,
Here.
Commissioner Armstrong.
Thank you all. Tonight, I think we're going to hear a couple of new ideas here on how we can tackle this work. I think we've all found this to be a pretty daunting task. I suppose that's why it's been put off for so many years. But without any further ado, I'd like to hand the meeting over to Jen. And Jen, if you'll go ahead, and at some point we'll be excited to hear your ideas, I think.
Fantastic. All right, so for those of you that can see the screen, we've got a PowerPoint. And first of all, we wanted to do just a general update. We want to give you an update from the Community Advisory Committee group meeting that we had yesterday. Yeah, there's been a couple of minor additions or changes to the PowerPoint to include the Advisory Committee group update. Yeah, no worries. And then we want to have a discussion on a proposed technical working group. Following that discussion, if we do want to continue with our discussion this evening, we have a little process overview and a zoning chapter review. So without further ado, our community advisory group has been meeting every Monday prior to these meetings for the last 3 months, I believe. The list you see here are primarily the people that have been at those meetings. Rick Sholes was at this last meeting. He hasn't been at the previous 2 meetings, but everyone else on this list has been in attendance at all of these meetings and really providing some great feedback and input on the process so far. And we just really had a robust meeting last night. So quick overview of the notes from that meeting. We went through a very similar presentation to what we have planned for this evening. Just looking at the overall format of the chapter that we have before us, and 100% of our community advisory group felt that the format is easier to read, easier to understand, and overall it headed in the right direction. The use tables that are in each zone district, we had a discussion that the application processes that we've rolled into this as a kind of an introduction to those application processes, we all felt that there needed to be one more step to implement those into the chapter. So where your table sits now and it just says application process and has a reference, I think we're going to try to divide that into each of the application processes and then really detail out, say, if you have one detached dwelling unit, you're in the administrative process, so there'll just be a checkbox. And then if you have 2 or more detached dwelling units, you're in that minor development, so there will be a checkbox. So it's just a little bit easier to read and not having to go back and forth for that reference. We decided that those application processes that are the current process seem to be working, but we would like to have a future discussion to see if those thresholds are appropriate and see if the process really is working with that administrative minor development and major development. We went into the dimensional standards table and kind of started to look at some building height, setbacks, and density requirements. Ultimately, we all agreed that it will be a lot easier to make a good decision on whether any of those thresholds need to change if we could model out what's existing. So, draw up a SketchUp model with a house sitting on a lot and see what 5 feet from the property line looks like and 15 feet at the rear, and the height and everything. And so we can start to really see how that looks on the ground and further assess if those dimensions are working or not. We had indicated at the meeting that the density for high-density residential through all the commercial districts currently is set at 15 dwelling units per acre. And we asked if, that was okay. A lot of times those will be, that density would be varied between zone districts, but it seems to be working. And so we had a bit of discussion on that, if it's not broken, let's not fix it. So I think for now that density seems to be appropriate. There was mention that there are too many variances. We were asking about, building height, if we were to propose a change to building height or any of the setbacks, have there been variances on any of those? And there was mention that there have been a lot of variance applications. So if we could pinpoint if there's one particular avenue that those have fallen into, that might help. Yes, Julie?
Is that referring to, is the complaint that we're getting too many applications, or is the complaint that too many of the applications are being granted? Do you know?
That there's too many variance applications being requested, which is a variance from the standards.
So the thought is, if we make it taller, then fewer people will ask us to make it taller yet.
Potentially, yeah. That doesn't mean you need to make it taller, but it's just it's a kind of a metric that we look at and say if we're getting a lot of variances in a certain category, do we need to look at that, or do we like it the way it is and we need to continue that process?
And I think it was also just talked about it, that we're also maybe offering too many variances. So we really need to look at why we're doing that and those things. So it's a little bit of both, Julie, that was mentioned yesterday.
Oh, so some people thought that there were too many variances being granted?
Being granted, right? And so what does that look like? And that's why, as you look through this, if you say, we're not going to do height is going to stay at 27 or 25 or whatever it may be, then we're not going to offer those variances in certain areas at all and really go through that. So there was a real healthy conversation, and I still think there's a lot of, we need to dig into it, but at least we started those conversations of what the variances are and how do we manage that, and then how do we set that moving forward.
Oh, I really appreciate that explanation, because to me, it seems like I expect us always to get variances. I mean, we can say that the height is 3 stories and we'll get people who say, can I build 4, So I'm not so concerned about the applications. I just think that's human nature to ask. It doesn't cost that much to ask. But I'm more interested in whether the concern was that there are too many variances being granted.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks.
There was a question in the dimensional standards table between the temporary and permanent structure distinction. And it was determined that we should keep that separate like they are. So that was a kind of a thought that came out of the meeting. There was one in the definition, in the zone district chapter, the definitions that we placed at the top, the attached dwelling unit definition is correct. In your definitions chapter, there's one word missing that reflects duplexes, so we're going to update that. And then this is a bigger conversation that we'll have a little bit later this evening, but you will see that we pulled out all those extra zone districts per our conversation last time. And at the bottom of the document, or the end of the document, we included some very basic kind of overlay language to try to describe that east and west side that we've been talking about as a little bit different character. The group last night really felt, kind of going back to a little bit backwards to the original conversation, that maybe we need to create one more zone district. So we'd have our general commercial, our downtown, and then the URA, and then one more district that could be those areas flanking downtown, east and west, right along Manitou Avenue, because it has been brought up many, many times that those areas really do have a different character than some of the other general commercial areas. So that's one thing we'd like to talk about, but the advisory committee really felt strongly that we should not have those as an overlay, but one more zone district that's just a commercial area that addresses those areas east and west of downtown, not including the URA. And then there was some discussion about height variation within the URA and maybe even within the entire community, that there's so much nuance with height, and there's some areas where 3 stories might feel right and some areas where 2 stories might feel right. and not necessarily 100% associated with a zone district. So I was telling the advisory committee that the city of Fort Collins has a document, it's a map, and they have different height regulations based on view sheds and river frontage and different characteristics. So, and it's referenced in the code as a tool. So that's one thing that we could consider, and the advisory committee was really liked that idea of, especially maybe it's just in the URA for now. It could be community-wide, but where we could say maybe on the south side you can have taller buildings than the north side, or something where there's slope considerations and other things. So that's kind of a summary of what we talked about yesterday. I really feel we had a really good, robust conversation, and as Denise said, started to really dive into the details and realize what we need to make some of those decisions moving forward. So, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just a couple of things. As we talked about yesterday, that this is really a zoning update. It's not a zoning rewrite. So we want to keep the items that are working, and then those that are not working, update on. So it's not a total rewrite, and we're changing everything, but this is a zone update. And it's really to make it easier for everybody to read and understand, and then look at those items that we need to say, oh, this isn't included, or this needs to be changed because it's not working, and really dig into those, but not change everything that's in the code. And we had a great conversation about what that means and what that looks like as we move forward. Are you going to talk about the two things that they recommended to discuss also? Okay, thanks. And I think Julie has a question.
Oh, I just wanted to say, in addition to the goal being making it easier, like you just said, which is fine, the goal is also to make it better in terms of the numbers and the rules, where we have variances, where we don't. That's my concern.
And that's the update, right? Those things that aren't working, we need to change. But there are parts of this code that are working, and so those are the ones we don't want to change.
All right, great. So Denise and I have been talking about a good path forward on this effort. I think.
Interrupt.
Oh yeah, go
Can I
ahead.
interrupt? There's one other thing that we talked about last night or yesterday that maybe you're going to present, but I think we just need to mention because it was another one of their feedbacks, and that was the top priorities, right? And the group added 2 additional items for the top priorities as we move forward. That's residential neighborhoods, protect the residential neighborhoods, and then the parking and mobility. And those 2 needs to be added as we move forward with this. That was 2 of the additional high priority out of the top. So we now have 5 high priority items as we're looking at this.
Great. All right. So Denise and I have been talking about a good path forward, and I think our last meeting highlighted the need to really dive into this document deep, and there's a lot of technical nuances that will need to be discussed. And so we were talking about creating a technical working group. So our advisory committee to this date has been kind of a community advisory committee, a sounding board for some of the ideas. It seems last night it really became apparent that group is doing really good at. It's a really nice mix of residents that I think provide a really great perspective. So we were talking about developing this working group comprised of staff representatives and community experts, a small group, such as the size that we've been working with this advisory committee, that would evaluate the scope of work and path forward now that we've been given an extension from DOLA, to try to look at the scope of work and say, now what does the schedule look like now that we've extended the process a little bit? Meet more frequently. It could be weekly. I don't think it'll be weekly every week. There might be gaps where we're preparing documents and then they're reviewing, and then we meet weekly to go through them, to go over the sections in depth, and then report to City Council and Planning Commission. The pros of this is a smaller group that understands that technical details can really dive in and have really robust conversation. We typically do this in all the communities we work in, and it's been really successful. The only con would be that they're not the ultimate decision makers, so it still comes to you all, and we need to present the message appropriately when it comes to you. But, so, like I said, we do this in all of our communities, and sometimes you have a gap of a month or so where, like I said, we're working on documents, sending it to them to review, and then we'll sit week by week and just go line by line through any questions they have, any questions we have, and really refine the code. And then, like we talked about last night with our advisory committee, we can be prepared to bring forward additional graphics or additional community examples that will help support the decisions that are being made. So I think we want to open this up to conversation and see if this is a technique that we want to employ with this project. So Mayor, do you want to?
Yeah, I gather that's all the slides you want on the topic, so this is presented.
For
so-
right now, for this
right.
working group,
Right,
correct?
okay. I think probably the simplest thing would be to go around the table and give everybody's take on that. I think maybe there's several people here who've already had an opportunity to discuss it in a little more depth. And I think Alan may be one of those, so I'd like to start off with Alan, and then we'll just move around the table.
Yeah, I am in agreement that I think this would be a good approach to go forward. And I've spoken to a few people who might be interested in participating, who have a lot of knowledge of our zoning code, and I've sort of offered that I could be a part of this if we do this.
Thank you. Councilor Chandler?
I'm not opposed to this. I think it's a great idea. I actually think the more heads we get, wrapped around this, the better. My only concern would be how would these individuals be appointed? And would council have input in the selection process of who sits on this subgroup?
Good. Thank you. Natalie?
I'm comfortable with creating this working group. I would also like to make sure there's a diversity of representation on the board or committee.
Good.
Oh, a diversity of representation.
Thank you. Tip?
I think it's a good idea. Like our colleagues have said, it's important to have as many voices as possible, diverse voices participate in the process. I think that one thing I would say is that in terms of the reporting lines, it seems still important to, as has been mentioned, important to recognize the elected representatives making the final decisions. So, for example, whereas I'm very, very enthusiastic with the addition of these two priorities, it seems to me that should be a recommendation to the City Council because the City Council had established the priorities. And I would be very much in favor of the City Council going along with that recommendation, but to my mind, it's still a recommendation from a working group or from any citizens group that there are. So I would want to respect that process.
Good. Thank you, Tip. Mike?
I think it's a fine idea.
Okay, Carrie?
I support it.
Thank you. Steve?
Yeah, I support it as well. And as far as them not being the ultimate decision makers, I don't think that's a problem because they would be meeting and coming up with their ideas and they would present them probably in a very rational manner. And I think that we'd probably accept them as City Council.
Thank you. Gloria?
I too support the idea. In the advisory meetings I've been in, there have been people present who, have a great deal of knowledge and depth and know the nuances of this. So I think that'd be good. I have one question, whether staff representatives would be there as a resource to respond to questions, or would they be driving the process? Would they be leading the process, I should say? Do you know?
Do you want me to respond?
Oh,
Is that
yeah,
okay?
please, Denise.
I don't see them leading. I see them that they'll be there providing insight, right, a perspective, but they wouldn't be making a decision or saying this is how it has to be. It would be, we would really put together a timeline, what we're going to tackle when, and they'll be keeping that. They would be managing the project, but their perspective would not weigh any more than anybody else's with the work group, and that's something I think is really important because this is the community's zoning update. And they are, the community needs to be the ones making the decision.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. Julie?
I'm supportive of the idea. I'm assuming that the committee you now have isn't cutting it. Is that, because we already have a committee? So I'm confused, why are we talking about a committee? We have a committee, so I'm assuming, oh, you want different people on the committee, or more people on the committee, or more technical people? But as long as city council gets to choose who's going to be on the committee, I'd be comfortable with it. Otherwise, I wouldn't. I also share the concern that was raised by Gloria, that even though this is a community group, we have different groups in town where the council liaison or the staff person is sometimes accused of being overly controlling. And so I want to make sure that this isn't a staff-led process, that it really is a group process, which is understandably difficult without a chair, but maybe they can elect someone to kind of officiate. So I'm fine with it.
Thank you, David.
I support the idea. It addresses some unease that I have had so far in the process because, as Jennifer and Denise pointed out, well, and you too, John, it's a very demanding and in some ways daunting process. I think, Judith, the issue is going to be finding volunteers to do this much work rather than choosing amongst them. But I think it's a real good idea. Obviously, it's more work for you and your staff, Jennifer, and also for at least the planning department. Denise, you seem to go to every meeting, but I presume that you are all in agreement with that. So, yeah, I think it's a good idea.
Nancy?
Thanks. Yeah, I definitely agree. Couple things. One, I think it's important for the group to, at a minimum, review the values of Manitou Springs. I think what we've been talking about as a council and planning commission, we keep coming back to the values that we hold, which are very different from a lot of our neighboring cities. Secondly, I think you want a diversity on it, but you don't want too many people. So I don't think on a work group that, come one, come all is an appropriate way to go. Typically, it is a work group 8 to 12, maximum of 12 people. And they'd also have to be committed to the process. They can't be in and out, because you can't start over every single meeting. That doesn't work well. My sense is that currently what you have been working with is a very high functioning group. I think that was demonstrated tonight in your review of what happened. So if they are willing to commit, I think that's at a minimum a great core for your group. Gloria, I think you had Gloria and Mike on it. So if Alan were to join, that would mean they'd be open meetings. And I don't think in this type of a work group that open meetings are a good idea. So I would just look at that. And yeah, that's all. Thank you. But bottom line, I think it's a good idea.
Okay, thank you. Judith?
One thing on my wish list would be for this meeting, this committee, though, I would really love to see someone step up to the plate that has some expertise and experience in environmental sustainability and resilience. I think that's a missing piece here, and I think that's going to be pretty critical.
Another missing piece is figuring out how, like Dave said, how to get the people with the expertise who have free time to do unpaid work for God knows how many months once a week. I mean, really? I don't know how realistic that is. I don't know how lucky you are in your other cities finding volunteers to do that. But I'm afraid if the volunteers we get are folks not experienced or not on the existing committee, I'd be concerned. As to the open meetings, though, can you explain that, Nancy, to me? Because it includes planning commission?
Whenever you have all the commissions and committees and so on, the formal commissions and committees within Manitou are subject to open meetings law, sunshine law. So you can't have 3 of them in a meeting without it being open to the public.
I see. I didn't realize that's the case if you have planning and council. Alan?
I think maybe Nancy is a little, this is going to be a different group than the existing group that Gloria and Mike are on. So, you mentioned the possibility that then there would be three of us if I was on it, and that wasn't the suggestion, really. This is a different group.
So do you want this to be what Nancy said, keep the group we have and add to it if we can, or do you want this to be a different group like Alan said? I don't know what we're doing. I would say, though, if the sunshine law is a problem, I'd much rather have Alan on there than Natalie, because he's been on the planning commission for 20-something years. But, because, he's got the planning experience and she doesn't. But do you want it to be two different groups? What was your
I
thought?
think this is for you guys to decide. I will tell you, this group is pretty diverse, and they have great discussion that's currently there. I do agree that Alan would be a great addition to this group because of his expertise. I do agree that a sustainability is needed. But if you look at it then from the other aspects of everybody's who's in there, there is great debate and there's great respect for each other. And that's part of it, right, is respecting each other as you go forward and listening and then debating that accordingly. So that would be, that's really a direction that we're asking for you. I do think that this group is a great starting point. We do have, if Alan comes on, we would have 3 commissioners, so we would need 1 commissioner to step off. The thing that I think would be important with this is that we keep minutes every single time we meet, and we make sure that those are public, right? So we have a page that says, here's what we're discussing, and here are the minutes that were done, and then we go and we give you guys, we go to Planning Commission, give them an update, come here, give you an update, say, are we on the market, do you agree? And they also are there to help present so that they can talk about the discussions that took place. The other part that I think is important that has not been discussed is going around to each of the boards. So let's say the Transportation Board, I'm just mentioning that board. But they have to do some due diligence before we just go and say, what is it that you want changed? They have to look at what the code currently reads and then say, here's our couple of recommendations, and not just come in with all these, we want this, we want this. They have to really look at the code, read it, and say, here are those changes, and we need to do that with each board. So that's another step that we need to add to this as we move forward.
Think all the boards are going to read the planning code?
They can read, for instance, let's say it's parking. They can read the aspects of that has to do with parking, and then we can make sure we bring those in as we look at it and say, here are the things that are with parking. What is it that you want changed? Otherwise, this is going to just continuously go on and on and on. And so we've got to be really structured. The other thing that I think is real important is I think people are willing to volunteer as long as they see success and they see things moving forward. And so that's going to be really important, is that the meetings are going to have to be very structured and very focused so that we know what we're doing each day, each time, and what's the goal to finish for that time.
Councilor Chandler?
Thank you.
Okay. And then I'd like to weigh in also. I support this. Generally, I think it's a good idea. I think we've all realized how complicated this is and how much heavy lifting there is. I think having a group that can meet more frequently than once a month is probably critical. Being able to meet weekly or near weekly and have a cohesive group, I think, gives us a good chance of success. I've had an opportunity to talk to several of the people on that committee, and they seem to be very invested in the process. They seem to be happy with it. They seem to be qualified, and they're enjoying it. So it looks like we've sort of discovered a fairly good core group there, so I'm comfortable with that. There's one concern that I have is that this group not proceed by itself, not operate in a vacuum, and I think the intent is to try and merge their ideas, periodically update Planning Commission and City Council. And I think also that we now have, and Denise, correct me if I'm wrong, we have like till August to get this done. So, okay, so the financing got pushed out. We've got funding through August. But I don't want that to be an opportunity to kick the can down the road. I'd like to see steady progress and have some expectation that, certain chapters are going to be finished in some reasonable amount of time so that everybody has satisfaction that we're doing the right thing. We have a chance to consider it. So that would be my take on this. It sounds like, in general, the planning commission and city council support this idea. I think that we got a few other ideas to discuss, possibly starting with the names we have up here. That's our core group. And so if anyone is familiar with that group and would like to speak to some of the strengths that they see in that group, or how it might be changed if this is, maybe needs a little tweaking, speak good. Natalie?
I just want to add that Rachel Buller is also a part of this group. She just wasn't listed.
Right.
She was, she just left early, so she didn't get on the list.
Okay, great. Counselor Chandler?
So have any of the people on this list been approached about their interest in meeting once a week indefinitely? So we have a place to start with some motivated people?
We talked
Or-
about this yesterday with them. We did not say them because I don't want to make any commitment without coming to council first, right? So we talked about that we were going to bring this to council and make this recommendation that we get a work group. They all supported that, but I have not reached out to any of them. I didn't think that was appropriate at this time without knowing the direction that you guys want to go or that this team wants to go. I do believe that some of them have just said, in passing, yes, they would be willing to commit this time. And it will be probably every week for an hour, hour and a half, which may mean in the evenings or whatever that may be. It will be probably Zoom most of the time as we move forward. And then some weeks that will be about 3 hours probably.
I would like to, if Commissioner Delwich is interested, to add his name on to the list of committee members, and then obviously discuss what that would mean for the other planning members on the committee.
I see we have questions or comments from both Gloria and David. Gloria, I think you were first, so why don't you go ahead?
Well, just to tell the truth, my interest.
Gloria, can you speak a little closer to the microphone,
Okay.
please?
Yes. Just to tell the truth, when this discussion occurred last night, I thought it might expedite the work of this advisory group and allow us to spend less time on little nuances and more time on big picture things. At this point, I'm not able to spend every Monday night with you. Love you, but not able to do that. So if this group becomes the new group or a version of that, I'm happy to be a part of the advisory group.
Thank you. David?
We want the right people on it, so check with Jeff and see if there's a way to not let this open meeting rule control that.
Well, if Gloria isn't on it, then it's easy for us to have Alan be on it, because then there'd only be two and there wouldn't be a question on open meetings anymore.
I don't think the open meetings is that huge an obstacle. It seems to me like when you're talking about public policy and public money, this, it should be intrinsically open to the public. So this has to be posted. That's a little bit of clerical work. In my mind, it's not a big deal, and in fact, it seems fundamentally wrong to try and not have it as a public meeting. So I don't think that's really an issue, and I don't think the people of Manitou would see it a whole lot different than me. Julie?
I agree with you, John, but I also appreciate Nancy's concern, and I'm wondering maybe the way to work it out is to have it be a public meeting and notice it up, even if we don't have a conflict, even if we have another council person or other person who joins. But there can still be a rule like we have here during work sessions that the public may not necessarily participate openly. They may be able to email and send questions, but not, bombard the meeting with their own stuff. So that way you don't have a big mess with people thinking they're going to take over the meeting if it's clear that they can just listen. And then you still have it be public so that the public doesn't feel like it's being pushed out. And I don't know if that might work for you all.
No, I think that's a really good point, and I think that could be done. I think the public could attend. They necessarily would not be commenting unrestrictedly, and perhaps there'd be times when they wouldn't be commenting at all, but at least they could listen. Nancy, did you have a thought on that?
My experience has just been, when you have a high-functioning, close-working group, that when you have an audience, it's more difficult to have forthright conversations sometimes. So I can see both sides. In terms of getting some really hard work done, and given that no decisions will be made by this group, I think that it would just be more productive to have them as a work group without it being open. So anyway, that's my thought.
Okay. Any other tip?
You guys are going to hit me for making this suggestion, but I'm going to put it out there anyway. We all have different positions, obviously, in terms of our roles and the expertise we've developed in our purview. So I see up there a number of the planners. We have two people from the city planning, and we have 2 to 3, however we cut it. Of the planning commission, we have 2 important realtors. We have Darlene Kennedy, who has great expertise. I wonder, Natalie Johnson is the one city councilor, and I wonder whether there should be 2. The thing is, and this might get back to the vice mayor's point about reading about what the character of Manitou is. The thing is as city councilors, you have a wider purview than anybody else. And you were elected for that reason. And that's one reason why I don't really flip out when the city council, for example, might not take a recommendation from the planning commission, because you look at a broader list of considerations. That's part of the process. And so I think it's great to have Natalie as a linchpin, and I also kind of think it would be good to have 2 people on that. But that's just, I know that asking for people to make another commitment is very hard, and so nobody's going to want to jump to that, but I actually think it would be advisable.
Let's make John Shada do it because he's not here.
I like your methodology, Julie. That's great. Serious, that's not a bad idea. Sorry, Alan, please.
Yeah, I would, to speak in John's defense, I think he has a lot of other stuff he's planning to do, and he's already said he doesn't have time. So, and I think that really that's going to be the real fundamental thing, like the people on this list, have they all committed to being available once a week? Because that's what it's going to take in the short term. And so we may find out that we're still looking for people to participate, because there has to be a commitment. It can't be show up one week and then don't show up for 2 weeks. And for people who have day jobs, it just may not be possible to do as much.
The other thing we could maybe look at, just to make it more palatable for your average not retired person, is maybe meet twice a month or something. I don't know if that'll help.
Question. I see Darlene and Andy are both here. Darlene Kennedy and Andy Wells, their names are up there. Perhaps we should ask them to comment. Can you share your thoughts with us? And we might ask you to volunteer while you're up here, but move forward at your own risk, at your own peril.
Darlene Kennedy, 18 Dialoma. I agree with everything you've said. I look at this committee as doing your work and then bringing it back to you for your decisions. Of course, we wouldn't be making any final decisions. Once a week is kind of tough. Twice a month is a little more palatable, especially that we're going to have to we're going to have homework. I mean, there's going to be a lot of homework. And for instance, there's some things that we started working on last weekend that I want to go out and I want to see what other cities are doing. So, not only are we going to meet, but I think on the off week, we're not just going to be twiddling our thumbs. So I do think the group is very committed. I appreciate everyone that's on it. And I do think the comments that you need environmental and sustainability is really good comments. parking, maybe a parking person. But we're really, I think we're headed in the right direction now. Thank you. And I'm very positive about it. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Darlene. Andy, you'd share your thoughts with us?
I've been on HAB for over 4 years, and we've been trying to do Plan Manitou and get some things done.
Andy, just give us your full name and your address too, please.
Andrew William Wells, and 139 Clarksley Road, Manitou Springs, 80829. And I've been a landlord for over 25 years, but concerned for housing and Manitou and things like that. I've seen a lot of history. I've been here all my life, and just like to get some things rolling. The HAB has not gotten a lot done, and we're trying to get things done. And I see some wheels finally turning. But, we've been through 3 planning directors and 3 interim planning directors, and every time we start over. But I'd be willing to commit to it.
And Andy, do you think every couple of weeks would be okay for a meeting, or with that could you keep up with that frequency, do you think? Or?
Yeah, I could.
Okay, so it looks like from the 2 representatives we have here, that an every other week schedule would probably be doable. Denise?
Mayor, I think if you guys agree to this, right, we have to go back and put a work plan in place. And then that work plan will kind of say what we need to do and how we manage it. And then we would work with the group of what it looks like, right? So it may be every other week, 1 month, and then 1 month we're going to have to work 3 weeks. So it really is going to be this work plan of what do we have to get accomplished each time, when, and we would bring that work plan to you to say, here's the work plan that we're proposing, and when we would come back to Planning Commission and Council, and hopefully we can stay on it. But I don't want to say it's absolutely every other week, because we really have to go back and take a step and say, okay, here's the scope, here's what we got to do, and here's the work plan, and then manage that accordingly. And then we'd work with the group, if this group chose, if they decided to be on it, we'd work with them and make sure that they bought into that work plan and how to manage it.
Right, good, yeah, I think we would understand that it would have to happen, but it looks like we're sort of coalescing towards a solution, or at least a pattern towards a solution. I guess one kind of, maybe this sort of a random thought that occurred to me, but we've had a number of things that we've looked at this year. We had a nuisance ordinance that we talked about, but that's sort of fallen by the wayside. In a sense, it's kind of related, I think, to some of this zoning, or it could affect it. We talked about a dark skies ordinance a little bit, not in depth, but there are some issues that council could be working that are sort of related to what this technical or this working group could be doing, and it may be that we could kind of coordinate some activities as well. That's looking pretty far down the road, but it's one way we could support each other.
The dark skies ordinance will be part of this. That's what we've decided, is that we would add the dark skies. The nuisance ordinance we're still working on, and neighborhood services will be bringing that back, and then we would just add it into this as you guys approve it. And then, of course, we have the tree cutting, the park use. We have some other things that we're working on that may not be part of this scope, but once you approve it, then it would be in that format, and it would just go accordingly to the thing. So yes, there would be individual ordinances that we will be working on that we would add to it and make sure it's the same format.
Right, so I think I don't think council is going to sneak out of any work. I think we're still going to have plenty to do. And see, there's a gentleman there, sir, I'm not familiar with you, but if you introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Rick Sholes, last name on the list there. I've been in Manitou Springs for 15 years. I've been watching a number of the construction things that take place along the way, a few permits that I've taken out. I've been a licensed contractor through building department for 22 years. Prior to that, I was building inspector for a company that provides services on Fort Carson for another 4. Yeah, so I'm kind of new to it, but taking carefully everybody's lead who wants to be a part of this group. I've probably, during the last 3 weeks, spent 5 hours a week on it. I first talked to Denise, and Darlene too, actually, about, what kind of direction, what's going on. I did see what a lot of the plans are. So I'm willing to commit to whatever kind of schedule Denise wants, and I can stay with it until August or whatever it takes.
Thank you, we appreciate that.
Yeah.
This is a real grassroots effort, so we appreciate the volunteers stepping forward. Well, it looks like we're coalescing towards a direction. Any further comments or ideas from either the planning commissioners or city council people? Alan?
Just one question. I'm assuming that if we take this approach, we maybe will back off on the joint work sessions for a couple months. Is that the plan?
Yeah, that really, I don't think that the joint work sessions are needed except for a couple of times maybe as we go forward. So that allows that fourth work session to be used for other things or not to have a meeting if we don't have a great amount of things to work on. So it does free up some time for council and for staff accordingly. As you've seen by the agendas, some of the agendas are rather lengthy because we only have one work session. So that would be part of the work plan that we would come back and present and really work through and figure what that and see what that would look like. So yes.
Thank you. Other comments? Well, we've already kind of indicated that we're coalescing towards this idea. I guess I would propose that we just kind of take a show of hands to see if there's support to give direction to Denise and Jen to put together this sort of a working group, talk to the volunteers or the intended volunteers and see what makes sense. Anybody oppose that idea or have a better idea? If not, are we in support of that direction overall? I would say, kind of show of hands there. Obviously, we're not technically voting, but because it's a work session. Anybody opposed? Okay, I think that's the direction then. Jen, Denise, do you have further questions? You see obstacles you'd like us to discuss at this point, or?
I would ask if you have somebody on that sustainability group that you would like to be involved to email a couple of people to me, your suggestions, so that I can reach out and see. And then I would say by January, we're at the end of October, January, we'll come back to council with the work plan and how we're moving forward. That gives a few months to really, and it may be before that, but December, as you know, we have a couple of meetings so I would say in January, we'll come back to you with a total plan and how we're moving forward, if that works for you.
Okay, Julie?
Oh, I was just going to suggest maybe, I have no idea if they'd be interested, but if Becky Elder would be willing to join the group, if she were told she didn't have to attend the meetings that have to do with building height, she only has to attend the meetings that have to do with sustainability, maybe she would do it. Or that pollinator lady that's always emailing us. Melody, thank you. Maybe somebody like that would be interested.
They're both here tonight, so but if you have others, the other one that I also thought of was Conrad. If we could get Conrad, he sees from lots of different perspectives, right? And I know that both Melody and Becky are very busy, but we can definitely reach out to all of them and see where it is. I don't think if we do sustainability, they can only attend one meeting or certain meetings, because sustainability reaches every aspect of planning. So they really need to be involved in every meeting and really talk about it from a sustainable perspective, from an economic perspective, from greenhouse perspective, from the whole, there's three or four, help me, Judith, legs. And so really looking at all of those legs of sustainability.
All right, Judith?
Conrad would be my first choice. And I see Becky's thumb up. I don't know, but for a number of reasons, he may not be able to commit to those, but he comes with an incredible wealth of expertise and knowledge in all aspects of environmental and economic sustainability as well. So I would be my first choice. Also, I know that our other environmentalists in the room also are so busy and seasonally so busy. So not that he's not, but that would be my recommendation.
Good, thank you. Well, I think that's probably the main topic. Okay, Tip?
Just one other comment. I thought that, I can't remember who was the one who said that it might be good to have someone with parking and movement, transportation. I think that's imperative for this committee.
That's an excellent point, and in fact, in the coming weeks, we'll be getting a parking, or mobility and parking presentation from Roy Cheney, who's really he's been living this up to his eyeballs here for the last year and a half. So we'll get that background, which I think would be useful for everybody, and then perhaps there would be an individual, not necessarily Roy, who would fill that role. But there's been a lot of work done on it, and I think bringing this group up to full speed might be, some of that might be necessary.
To me, to my mind, it's a little bit of what Judith was talking about, how sustainability needs to permeate everything. So for example, the issue about heights is that sustainability has to do with how many people we're going to be putting on a street or in a neighborhood or in a zone. And the same kind of thing is about transportation. I mean, are we going to, do we have an idea of how many people we want to add in new housing or these kinds of things? I think that it's really important to have that, someone who really has that expertise to have a voice in the decision.
I would like to talk to Roy on that, if you guys, he probably is the most well-read of everybody that I know regarding parking. So I'd like to just chat with Roy and then get his perspective, and I'll let you guys know via email or something like this, like that, if that works for you, so we can keep moving on it.
Okay. Denise, I guess kind of a related question is, if we have city staff working on this, we've got Michelle and Karen on the list here, and it looks like Roy's one of the usual suspects. Is that going to throw something else off schedule?
Well, all of these are so important, right? And Michelle and Karen, this is planning, so they would be involved from a hazard mitigation perspective. The challenge that we have to do, and you guys mentioned this, and it really depends on the facilitator. And I think yesterday went very well. I don't know if those that were there, if you agree or not, but it's making sure that the staff doesn't run it, but that their perspective is there. We hear it because they're the experts on so many things, but then we listen to everybody else and really make sure that we're managing this. And I think that's why this is so important. Instead of being led by planning, and that's great that planning leads it, but then it becomes a staff-led project instead of a community-led project, and that's what we have to keep the balance as.
Good point. Okay. I notice a couple of things we talked about also doing tonight was to review proposed 3-month meeting schedule. That may not be necessary, but I'd like to have you speak to it if you want.
I believe if you guys have agreed to this, that really we do not need to move forward with the rest of the meeting tonight, that everybody gets to go home early if you approve that, because really some of these we have to take a deeper dive, and we learned that last night. There's a couple of them that we really need to take a deeper dive on and learn, and we just got to scratch the surface last night. And so we really want to look at that, if you are okay with that, or we can move forward.
Tip?
I'm actually not okay with that. We spent a lot of time preparing, and one of the things I wanted to talk about was that it seems to me there's a little bit of a disconnect in the direction of our discussion at our last meeting and what's in this document. And I feel that I would be silenced in a way, having participated in those discussions and done my homework tonight, to then be told, well, now you can just go away. That doesn't set right with me.
Ditto.
Okay, ditto. Yeah, and I think I'd like to use a little bit more of the evening here and see if we can make some progress. Anybody else? Julie?
Yeah, I would too. I wasn't able to understand some of what we were assigned to do, and I spent a bunch of time, but I'd like some questions answered.
Okay,
I love the idea of going home early, though. That does sound so tempting. But I agree. I think we've all probably spent some hours on this, and we may as well throw our ideas out, and maybe those ideas can be considered then by your group, the advisory group.
Great. Ellen, did you want to say something? Okay, all right. So there were a number of things. I mean, the definitions, we could go over that. I guess maybe talking about the overall, I think the format that was presented here, or with the packet, was a lot better than what we that was part of the frustration, I think, for the last meeting. We just realized it was such an ungainly chunk of information. Now we can do comparisons in the Excel spreadsheets and so forth. So maybe it would be appropriate, I would suggest we start there and see if we like the format, the way the information's presented. That doesn't necessarily have to be a long discussion, but I think, see what kind of buy-in there is on that.
Mayor, if it's okay, she does have a PowerPoint that really goes through and one of them is format. If we could just follow that, if that works for you. And one of them is format. There's a couple of things on definitions. It's how we did yesterday's work group, and it's through the PowerPoint if that works for all of you.
Okay. If there's no objections, I'd suggest we look at the PowerPoint.
And I'll try to be brief because I really do want to hear from you guys. You don't need to hear me talking too much. So, and I apologize, my mic is not turning off anymore, so I don't know if that causes an issue on Zoom or anything, but yeah. I was over here pounding the button and it wouldn't turn off. All right, so just a brief overview, just to remind us all. I think the last meeting was a really good reminder that we kind of just need to set the foundation and set the stage a little bit. That as Denise mentioned, and that's our new motto is, we're not rewriting the code, we're updating the code, only updating what needs to be changed. And as we've talked about throughout the whole process, we're taking all of the existing code and repackaging it, reformatting it, and that's what you're starting to see with this zoning chapter. So we've identified 7 different chapters, and actually you've seen 2 chapters now because you've started to see the beginning of that definitions chapter as well. But I just wanted to put that forward again, just so everyone's aware that that it's your existing language we start with. We repackage it into these different chapters, which we've already started to do. Actually, we've done that for all of the chapters. And then we start to do what you're seeing in the zoning district chapter, where we start to redline and see if there's other pieces that need to come in and kind of move around to make a clear and easy to use document. So that's our process kind of moving forward. And as Denise mentioned, we just really wanted to put forward that we're hearing what we're talking about here. And so I know there was a list of priorities in our assessment report, and that full list that we've been bringing to all the meetings. We wanted to distill that down to what we're hearing are the really top priorities that we're really being consistent with throughout the whole process. And as we mentioned, parking and mobility and protecting residential neighborhoods came up last night. Other than that, the community character, we've heard again and again, community character. We want to know that we're in Manitou Springs, and we want to make sure the code is producing development that meets that goal. Building height, we've heard a lot throughout this whole process about building height and sensitivity to views and existing development. Tree preservation, overall green infrastructure. I think the conversation tonight really supports that. And then just overall reorganization of the code for ease of use. So these are kind of, I would say, our basic principles that we're rolling with, trying to make sure that we're thinking about them at every step of the way. So I was going to say, if there's any additions or any changes, please let us know.
Any comments, questions?
Just
Yeah.
parking and mobility, I
Yep.
think that needs to be a priority on all of these, so that'd be my only addition.
I guess we can push on.
It is, yeah, that's okay. No worries. I look at this, I sometimes look at this as like a puzzle, there's many pieces that come together, so.
Can I just ask,
Yes.
because Tip, really, you made the point, is this okay with you? Because we've added a couple. We really want to know, is this your priorities? Because we don't want to be moving and then all of a sudden something else gets added. So can you think of something, and we can't have 100, right? But does this work for you?
It's been updated since last night. All right, we're good with this?
These categories are so general, some people are going to want to have as many more people come into town as possible, and let's build, as many garages as we can. Some people are going to say, I don't want more people in Manitou. We don't want more garages, and we don't want more housing, and we don't want more density. So, yeah, but, the categories are fine. It's just that, people obviously will have different views on each category, but the categories are all important to discuss. I mean, if you really, when you say, if you asked 100 people, what does it mean to say building height, existing sensitivity to existing development? I mean, that is so generic. How do you, you know, you can't be for it or against it because it doesn't really mean anything. I mean, if it means something, I don't know what it means. So I'm fine with the categories, though.
Okay, Tip?
I guess that I would say I really appreciate these categories. And Julie, one thing that I've been waiting for us to get to in this is that I think that some of the recommendations are not commensurate with these priorities. And if we agree that these are the top priorities, then we can bring that slide up. And when we're talking about a particular issue, we can say, well, the reason why I don't really love this is because it violates number 2, 3, and 5. I'm just using that just as an example. So it gives you some kind of, I think it gets to the idea of the, like what it means to be Manitou that we've talked about over and over. So I think it can be useful in when we get down a little bit more into the weeds.
Great. Any other thoughts on that? Okay. Let's see, moving on. I just wanted to give you an overview. We try to put everything out in a memo and everything, and I think there's just so much to be said for sitting here and kind of talking through what's in this document and where we're headed. So you'll see on the slide in front of you, there's the existing code to your left and the proposed new format to the right. And true to our word, we said we would be incorporating a lot of graphics and tables. This chapter right now doesn't have a lot of graphics to support it. There will be many more. Although the dimensional standards we were talking about last night, one of the best ways to really visualize that is to have like I said, that little, you have a plot of land with a little house sitting on it or a building sitting on it, and you really see what those dimensions look like. And we do those to scale, so it's not a arbitrary drawing. It's really drawn to the dimensional scale per the dimensional standards. So that will be in addition to this. Once we finalize the dimensional standards and are comfortable with them, then we'll develop those graphics. But overall, your current code is very lengthy, a lot of words. It's not, it's organized pretty well with bullets. It's not long paragraphs or anything, but so that's what we're trying to look at today. And like I said, the advisory committee last night overwhelmingly said, great format, really like the way this is headed, reads well. So if I could just get kind of a show of hands that you agree with just the general format that the document is headed in, all the other chapters will start to look very similar to this. So are we headed in the right direction?
Show of hands here in favor of what they're doing.
Great.
Yeah, some things aren't necessarily subject to charts and graphs, though.
Correct.
So I'm assuming you're not going to force stuff into a chart that isn't chartable.
Correct. So typically what will show up in the charts, as you've seen here, dimensional standards, the use table. The use standards chapter will include a full table with every single use, and then down the side and every single zone district across the top, and then permitted and conditional, designations. Parking is another one that tables lend well to the parking regulations. Some of the landscape regulations can look really good in a table where you're talking about different requirements for different zone districts. Those are kind of the primary ones that'll get rolled into tables. So anything where you can take a list and simplify it into a table and combine some of the elements, that's what we're trying to do.
I know this isn't what we're supposed to talk about, but I just have to ask you real quick. So is this sample chart here on the right, is this with respect to new development only?
New infill and redevelopment, correct.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Alan, you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time looking at this, and I'm a little uncomfortable with the redundancy. It's like the parking standards are the parking standards. They don't vary other than, different, all the residential uses have the same parking standards, and you repeat them like 7 times. And what I find when you do that kind of stuff is anytime you make a change, you have to update it in all those 7 places. And it seems like you could almost have one table that says residential parking standards rather than repeat it. And likewise, the application process seems to have a lot of this similar redundancy that
Right.
that maybe, they all, it's like, I tried to understand why there were different characterizations, and it seems like it always goes back to the unit type defines which the application process is, but we repeat it over and over. So on the other hand, I think to have this matrix with zone districts and permitted uses, I mean, to me, that's where the graphics could really be useful.
Great. Yeah, and actually, even as consultants, we go back and forth sometimes on whether this should be detailed out here or just in the overall use table. And I agree with you. My problem with this was it felt like very repetitious when we were putting it together. And the parking standards will get more nuanced by use, but we can play around with some different options. So.
Yeah, I would suggest, I can understand the parking standards by other uses, but residential uses,
Right.
I really question whether that will change as we move forward.
Yeah.
A 1-bedroom, a studio, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, I don't see that changing. So it seems like to repeat it 7 times maybe puts a lot of noise into the graphic, so it's less readable.
Okay, great.
Other questions from planning commissioners or city council on this slide?
I just wanted to comment that whereas I could go either way, I see Alan's point. On the other hand, if I were just a user and my only interest was in building an attached dwelling unit, I could just go to one thing. So to me, it's kind of come see, come saw. I could go either way on it.
Well, and that was the initial thought process, was as an applicant, you open the zoning chapter first typically and say, I'm in zone district, general residential, and I want to do let's say I want to do a 4-plex. I want to do 4 attached dwelling units. So now I look down, I find my 4 attached dwelling units. I see that I need to do a minor development application. Here's my parking requirement. Here's reference to other sections that I can click on a link and go over to other sections of the code. I do agree with Chair Allen as well, though, because it is repetitious. So it's and there is that issue of if it changes in one place, it needs to change in the other. So we were cognizant of all of that. Putting this together, we're trying to think of all the different users and how to make that user friendly. So I think maybe we tweak it a little bit more, maybe play with the table a little bit more, and work with our working group on that and refine it to really work well. Yes.
How do you build a half of a parking spot? What is that?
So that's per your current regulation right now.
Yeah.
Typically, you round up from a halfway point. So great.
Judith?
This is strictly just an administrative thing for me. I don't know if anyone else had this issue, but these are relatively large packets with different colors and strike-throughs and highlights. And I'm the last person that wants to kill a tree, but I do feel like these are the kinds of things I'd like to have a hard copy of, because it's really hard for me to go through and make notes, and I'm on my computer, and then I'm making notes in a different notebook so I can reference going back to the page so everyone can find it. So that's just my thing, but I would like to see at least the main zone part of it offered to us, to those of us that want it in a hard copy.
Oh, I agree. I went through so much toner printing this stuff out and jotting notes, and it's really, I think when we get a packet like this, I know we probably won't see one for a long time again, but I'd like to have it in paper. I'd also like to have it, I still object to getting this on a Friday night. Seriously? And then we have to be ready by Tuesday night? I'd like to get, when this comes back to us in whatever format, I'd like to get it a week in advance so we can really read it and not have to stay up so late. If it can't be done that way, then I think we should postpone our meeting so that we can have a full week to read all this stuff.
Julie, you did get this one early, so I sent it out. It wasn't just in the packet, so I sent it out to all of you early, so you had plenty of time to look at it. I think it was a week in advance, maybe even 10 days in advance. So this
Oh.
one you did get early.
Well, thank you very much. I personally missed it then, but I do appreciate that. That's helpful.
Okay, but that is something we should be, but there's something we'd be cognizant of, because there's a lot of homework here, so that happens to council, it happens to the other groups too, so we'll maybe try and be more sensitive to that in the future. Okay. If there's nothing else on this, any more comments on this slide, let's push on.
Yep, absolutely. So this one I don't really need any feedback on. I just wanted to explain it, because I heard several mentions of additional administrative approval in the last meeting, and I wanted to kind of clear that up. This is the current process that we are proposing no change to at the moment, other than a couple of kind of typos and things in the code that we're just clarifying the terminology. But currently you have a 3-tier process. There's administrative review, there's minor development that goes to Planning Commission, and there's major development that goes to Planning Commission and City Council. In the zoning document, you'll see this language was buried in the definitions, and it even took us a little bit of piecing together to figure out how these different processes work. So we thought if we brought it up to the front in the zoning chapter, then, like I said before, you have a site that you want to develop, you go to that zoning district and see what you're allowed to do, and then you see that it's either administrative or minor development or major development. That triggers you to look into that application process portion of the document to see the full application process, but at least it puts it in a place that's not buried in the definitions and brings it up front. So that's why we've incorporated that in the zoning district. I think this whole process still bears some scrutiny down the road, but for now we're just pulling it forward, and then we can start to adjust if the process works appropriately. So were there any questions on that? I just wanted to make that clear that this was your current process, and we're just trying to bring it to the surface and make it clear. Okay. All right, I'm going to keep rolling.
Sounds good.
So we can get out of here. Well, maybe not early at this point, but the organization of dimensional standards, I think Julia was the one that had pointed out that it would be nice to see some of these standards side by side. And so we took several approaches. One of them is footnotes throughout the document that try to guide you to where information's coming from, so you can flip around. But we thought this would be a really great opportunity to pair up side by side the existing regulation and the new, so you can see that there's very little that we're proposing change to at this moment. But I think we might want to, with that working group, as we discussed last night, there might be a few other tweaks that come out of this down the road. So your current table of dimensional standards is all in one place. We have broken it out in this zoning chapter by zone district, so you can see specifically each zone district what your dimensional standards are. And that's your setbacks, your building height, density, so on. Many of those standards in your current table are in footnotes. So the current table has some standards and then little letters. So you have to read down to the footnote, and that might direct you to another section. And so we combed through and pulled all that together into that Excel spreadsheet you have in front of you. I think it still needs some work. The dimensional standards always need a little work. The use tables always need quite a bit of massaging, but this is kind of our first collaboration of bringing it all into one place. So the following changes are proposed, and by no means are these set in stone at all. It was just a suggestion that's come out of some of the conversation. As you'll see, the main suggested change would be in the general residential zone district. There has been some discussion at the staff level about applicants that come in and the newer home building is to build a 9-foot ceiling. So your current 25-foot building height maximum in that zone district, it's very hard. It's not impossible, but it is hard with the steeper pitched roofs and the 9-foot floor plates to get a building in that 25-foot dimension. So there was some suggestion to increase that to 27. It's just a proposal on the floor right now. I know we're very sensitive to building heights, and we had a really good conversation last night about maybe we do leave it at 25, and maybe we need to look at some of the sites, existing sites, and look at where they're measured from. The the definition for how a building height is measured is very convoluted, and I think a graphic will really help that. So I took it upon myself to look up some other definitions from other communities, and I want to share those with you guys tonight to kind of help us think about that. We don't need to make any decisions here tonight, but just to let you know that we're headed in a direction of looking at how that building height is measured, looking at some existing buildings that are on steeper slopes and see, how that 25-foot plays out. And maybe it doesn't need to change. So it might be okay to leave it at 25. We're kind of vacillating in a 25 to 27-foot height at the moment. We're trying to not allow a three-story building. So still keep to 2-story buildings, but just allow for, new trends in construction to be allowed. So yes, Julie.
Is there a place that tells us what all these abbreviations mean? Like GR/E, GR/N, LDR/E, LDR/N.
Yeah, that's your zone districts.
Yeah,
So
does it say, you know that, but I don't know that. So
it's, yeah,
where do
okay.
I look to see what you're referring to? Because there's no
Yeah.
key at the bottom of the page.
That's a good point. So we could spell that out in this chart to help out, but if you pair it up with the zone districts chapter, it says general residential and then parentheses GR, and so that's where that correlation comes into play.
So GRE is different than GRN and...
Oh, GR existing and GR new.
Oh. Huh. How was I supposed to know that? Okay, thank you.
All right. So again, we incorporated notes from within the current code directly into the table, and the other piece was the rear yard setbacks with regards to detached rear-loaded garages was very complicated to understand, so we just simplified the language, kept the dimensions, but simplified the language on that. So right now, those are the only proposed changes until we really dive into some of these dimensions further. And then I do have a question, and it's kind of more of a philosophical question that, again, doesn't need to be answered tonight, but kind of to think about is our high-density residential and all the commercial districts have a maximum density of 15 dwelling units per acre. And I just didn't know if there was a need to vary those at all, if we're happy with 15 dwelling units per acre. And I have some graphics to kind of explain what that means, so we can just kind of be thinking about that as we move forward. So your dwelling unit per acre is how many actual units you can get in 1 acre of land. So this graphic right here is representative of, on the left, 3 dwelling units per acre, and you can kind of see how they're spaced out. 8 dwelling units per acre in the middle. You see how we have a couple of detached dwelling units, a couple of attached. You can start to see how the pattern looks in an 8. 12 dwelling units per acre over on the right. You see there's more attached. There still can be detached. When you're in the 8 units per acre, you can get detached dwelling units. They're just on smaller lots typically. But so you can just kind of start to get a visual for how these dwelling units per acre might look on the ground. And then we do this in a lot of different communities where they ask, what does that density look like on the ground? So the upper left, you don't have any densities in your code that are 40, but this is a retail on the bottom and two floors of residential and office above. That building does have 40 dwelling units per acre, and it's simply because the units are stacked and in a downtown urban configuration. 10 dwelling units per acre in the kind of 8 to 12 range really is where you see more of the attached townhome type structure. And then the bottom picture is kind of a brownstone product. You see a lot in cities. That picture is actually in Fort Collins, and it's a really cute little subdivision. But those yield 24 dwelling units per acre. So you can see how in between those units they have open space, common open space. They're condominiumized, so they have rear-loaded garages. They don't own the land that they're sitting on, but just to give you kind of a visual of what these density units or dwelling units would look like in real form. And then I just wanted to bring forward, just for comparison, I pulled 3 different communities, Estes Park, Glenwood Springs, and Breckenridge, given their kind of similarities with historic tourist towns, slope constraints. So Estes Park, and I've just compared their general residential on all three of these. I did include the multifamily just for conversation, but Estes Park has a maximum density in their general residential of 4 dwelling units per acre, which is less dense than what you guys have. Front setbacks at 25 feet from arterial roads and 15 feet from other roads. Side setbacks at 10 feet. Rear setbacks at 15, which is what you all have, and a maximum building height of 30. They will allow in their multifamily residential zone up to 8 dwelling units for housing and 24 for senior living. And I didn't have a chance to call anybody there to find out, what the distinction is there, but I was curious about that. How they measure building height, I really liked this example the best out of all the ones that I pulled. It's fairly similar to yours. Yours is based on a perimeter calculation. This is just taking your lowest point elevation and your highest point elevation and dividing it by 2, so getting the average of the grade across your site, and then measuring that to the top of the building. And they offer several different variations on where the top of that building is based on your roof type. I know there's a lot of technical terms in there, but I really like the way that they presented this. So some food for thought on that one. Breckenridge, you can see their density in their general residential is a little higher at 9 dwelling units per acre. They're a little more constrained, and their zoning code is one of the strangest ones I've ever seen with all their zoning districts, and they have all these conservation districts, and it's a little bit to get your head around, but their front setbacks are 15 feet, side setbacks at 5 feet, rear setbacks at 15, so you can see some of them are a little tighter than yours, or actually maximize your building space. And their max building height is 26 to 30 feet, and it was dependent on a couple of different variables. Their building height is measured just to the highest point of a flat shed or mansard roof. They didn't offer how you get that average grade, so that was curious to me. Glenwood Springs doesn't have a density listed, but they did have a front setback of 30 from arterial roads and 20 from other roads. That same 5-foot side yard setback and same 15-foot rear yard setback. So, and a max building height of 27 feet. So you can see how all three of these were 26, 27 to 30, still a little bit above your 25. That doesn't mean we need to raise yours, but just giving you some comparisons to other communities. And their measurement was fairly similar to Breckenridge, with not really defining that ground plane, but they do offer those graphics to show you. And I assume they're meaning by the graphics that it's from kind of that average grade. It just doesn't clearly spell that out. They say above finished grade, measured to the highest point, but that finished grade is determined when you build the house or when you're designing the house. So you still have to kind of set that grade at some point and deal with the slope in that situation. So, any questions on all of that? Was it helpful to kind of see what other communities are doing, so that we can compare that to our chart and start to think through this?
Any comments, questions? David?
Of course, it depends on how you measure building height, but
Yep.
27 sounds like a minimum reasonable to me as an architect. Yeah.
Judith?
I just would have loved to have had these slides in the presentation, because what I did today, and just for you, to know how nerdy I am, I Googled today, how do you measure building height? Because I'm reading all this stuff and I'm like, oh my gosh, and so I spent 2 hours on Google. I'm like reading all sorts of different ways, and I'm like, okay, I give up. And so it just if possible, it would have been, because yes, that was very helpful. It would have saved me about 2 hours today.
Thank you, Judith. Mike and then Tip. Mike?
This was a result of last night's conversation, so she's pulling this from recommendation from last night.
Thanks. Tip?
I think it's really helpful, and maybe not in a completely direct way. I like seeing this, but probably all of us are pretty familiar with these communities. And topographically, they're very different from Manitou. And so I like being able to see this and then imagine why I would have to think about whether these guidelines are appropriate for our community or whether we would have to really rethink them a little bit given who we are. We're kind of in a box canyon compared to these communities. So that would be something that we go with. So I would caution against just saying, well, because it's like this in Glenwood Springs, then we should do it. I would say, well, given what Glenwood Springs is, that gives me a kind of ballpark idea of the kinds of things I should be thinking about given our particular community. So I think it is really helpful.
Other comments? I'll say I do like the graphics. I think that adds a lot. Well, Denise?
Yeah, I just want to mention, and I know Mike said it, but really, the reason, that's why this work group is so important, because they were able to flesh out and ask some great questions and say, here's this, so that when you do get the PowerPoint, there aren't the changes the next time. It's already been vetted and some ideas and some ways to show it. So that's why it was changed, and we apologize for that, but we were able to really vet last night.
Great, thank you. If there are no further
right.
questions on this slide, maybe we can push on.
Yeah, so the only other thing that I wanted to talk about tonight was that, like I mentioned earlier, this east and west overlays that I know we pulled the zone districts back, but still wanted to have some sort of nod to that east area and the west area. And the advisory committee last night pretty resoundingly said, let's put one more zone district back in and call it the Manitou Avenue Commercial or something to that effect. And it would just apply to properties right along Manitou Avenue that front on Manitou Avenue in the commercial zone district currently. So there, and it was really to capture the conversations we've had before about building height specifically in those areas and character. And I realize a lot of the character will come out in those design guidelines that we've pulled and will still use as a standalone document. So I would like some direction on this and see if you agree with the advisory committee to develop this one zone district rather than the 5 that we had before, or if we like the overlay. And there was some concern about the overlay because it kind of like we've talked about before with the urban renewal areas, if you have it as an overlay, why not just have it as a zone district? So I know we've talked in circles on this topic, but this feels really good to me and it felt really good to the advisory committee. So I would like to hear if we're headed in the right direction with that, because we will develop that one more piece out in the zone district chapter.
Alan?
Yeah, I thought it was a very interesting proposal. I like it.
Okay.
You know, I'm not sure, the numbers we'll have to deliberate on, but I like the concept of having those lower elevations on the east and west of downtown. I mean, lower heights.
Okay, Tip?
I've always been agnostic about how many of these we had, even from our earlier conversations. It doesn't really matter to me a whole lot. What matters, I think, is what's in what's in it. And to my mind, but you can already tell, from my previous comments, I really am opposed to this 45 feet height in some of the adjacent districts. And it seems to me that what's happening here is to try to preserve that kind of 45 foot with only a 10-foot setback, that people might be rightly saying, well, we don't want that adjacent to our downtown, so we should have another district. What I would suggest is that we probably just have the one district, but with the lower heights for the whole thing, and then it solves the issue rather than trying to separate the two. So that would be, and I'm sure we can talk more about that. This is what I've been kind of waiting for us to talk about. Because this has been such an important point and I guess that I was surprised about this when I read it, because I thought at our last meeting that we were moving we had started to move toward a consensus view about having lower heights. And then when I read this and saw these commercial heights that could be stepped up, and I'm thinking, I'll just say, I live on Grand Avenue, and I walked from Grand Avenue to here. That wasn't the whole downtown core, but I don't think there's a 45-foot building. There's no 4-story building. The largest building, the tallest, is the one that Swirl is in. So that one's 3 stories, but tall, must have a big attic. But the downtown core, they're 2 and 3 stories, and they're modest heights. The 45 would be more like the hotel that's being built right now, with the 10-foot setback from the front. I would just urge you guys, everybody here, I just don't want to see that all along Manitou Avenue. I've said that before. I just am opposed to that, but it might be I'm only one person about this. I don't know. That's why I'm curious about. But I would suggest going to the 25 or 27-foot heights throughout that zone, and then we wouldn't have to worry about carving out a different zone or anything. That would be my that's what I would argue for.
Ellen?
Yeah, I guess I misread something, because I thought what I was reading was much lower heights in these overlays, like 28 and on the west side of Manitou Avenue, and 28 with some considerations on the east side of downtown. But then, the URA is a whole nother discussion. And I'm with you that 45, that's the only place I see 45 other than the downtown zone. And I'm definitely wanting to reconsider that.
I guess I'm just asking, in the proposed thing for commercial, I'm sorry, my glasses are fogging up with the mask, but am I not seeing that the first one, the new downtown, okay, that's 40, and then there's the new commercial in the middle, which is 35, and then the one that's the new overlay, the new one that can go up to 45. And it can go up to 50, is that right?
In the URA. Yeah. Yeah, and that's the one that I'm saying, definitely. But I guess maybe some of the verbiage was different that I read. I didn't have this chart, and I'm pretty sure it said 28. Is that correct, Jennifer?
Yes, so in that mixed-use commercial, which is the URA, that language that says 35 feet building height, incentive award up to 45, that's in your current code now. It's just in a kind of a convoluted way. And also, there's footnotes in a lot of these dimensional tables that are also in your current code that you can go up to 45 in the downtown zone. There's some height allowances in the historic districts based on your current code. So if we need to look at that and reduce those or not allow those height allowances, it might even trigger just a slight update to the historic preservation design guidelines, because that's where that's tied to. Yes.
So the way I interpreted this was, with the exception of the URA, mixed-use commercial, whatever we're calling it now, 2.3.5 commercial mixed-use overlay and 2.3.6 residential mixed-use overlay read, maximum building height shall be no higher than 28 feet except where the third floor is stepped back at least 10 feet from the front and rear facades per figure below. So again, I want it more granular.
Okay.
If we're going to make exceptions, I want to know exactly how many feet that is, because I don't want it. So there's other places where, and just while we're at it, in those same 2 zones, there is a sentence above that: minimum rear setback shall be no less than 20 feet, but in parens you have 15 feet when adjacent to an existing property. So I wasn't sure, was it 20 feet or was it 15 feet? When we do these things, like except where, when you do this, then I want 2 different heights so that we can talk about all of the potential heights in each zone.
Great.
Chip?
And when we opened this whole discussion, I understand that we're revising, but what we were continually, what we all said was that if there were things in the current that we wanted to change, that we would want to, and we talked a lot about that particular building that's going up right now, and it was in the existing, it was permitted, but people were like, but that's not what we want. And I think that was kind of a wake-up call to a lot of people to say, we want to bring these kinds of heights down and think about that. So again, I already intimated this, and I don't mean to be mean about it, I'm just, like invested
You're
in it.
fine.
That when you look at the priorities that you were talking about, for example, that it has to help residential communities. Well, look at on the commercial the properties, how many are adjacent to general residential. So the thing is that what you'll be doing is, if we continue with these high heights, we're going to be degrading the quality of the residential. We say that we want to preserve the view corridors and the natural environment, but I think that if we have all those hotels that are going to be 45 feet tall all along with a 10-foot, that is not going to be in keeping with what our priority is. I don't think it's in keeping with what Manitou's character is. I'm just thinking about those priorities that we agreed upon. And so to my mind, I really think this has to be reconsidered in light of the priorities, because I don't think we're following the priorities. Oh, and as a little bit of an aside, this goes back a little bit, but while I have the floor, the thing about the way we do it according to perimeter to get the average height, and then the high and the low, this gets a little bit to the difference between a mean and a whatever that term is right now, median. And the thing is, because we're so steeped everywhere, then if you just do the high and the low, then it can be really disadvantageous to neighboring properties. And so that's why we had developed this notion of going the whole way through, so that it's not just like this one high point that quickly drops down in here, and this is the buildable part, and here's the residential neighborhood that you can then have this huge building right up against it, if you see what I mean. So I think that I want to urge us to be very careful in reconsidering the way we come up with where the buildable altitude is.
That's really helpful for me to understand. And also, as you were talking about that, I was thinking about the one example where it's from the finished floor. I mean, then you're not dealing with grade at all. It's the main floor, finished floor. It's from there up, and it doesn't matter. You're nestling it into the hillside. You're putting it on the flat spot. So that might be something for us to consider. Because it feels to me, as driving around, like there's seems to be a lot of residences that are well above that 25 foot, and I think it's because of the measurement from the ground level. They just tower. But also, I just thinking through things. You guys get me really excited about this stuff because I love writing this stuff. But when I'm here and when I'm driving around and walking around and thinking about these building heights a lot, especially on the west end, for some reason, I was noticing today how it really steps up. I can really see houses stepping up that hillside. And to your point, even if you have a 3-story building there, we're going to lose a little of that step. And I think if we can keep those building heights down, then you still preserve that really, unique character that you guys have. And when I was looking at communities, to your point, I haven't actually found another community that's exactly got this situation. There's pockets of communities, but you really do have a unique situation with that kind of canyon wall and the steps, and I just think it's beautiful. So I'm all for helping you preserve it. So I am hearing that maybe we need to take some of these allowances for the higher heights, bringing them down a little bit, or make it more clear, to Judith's point, that it's not just you can do this if you do this. So.
Yeah, okay, just to clarify, what you have in this chart is different what you have in the words. I don't see the 28 feet max. I don't see the same setbacks. It sounded to me like you were proposing an overlay on the east and west of downtown that would have those lower heights.
Right.
And also they would have increased rear setbacks, which is pretty significant. I think that's an improvement because of that interface we always have between residential and commercial. So is there some disconnect with this chart? Because it just seems like.
The chart doesn't have those overlays in it.
Okay.
So that's the disconnect.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just wondering why we wouldn't make the URA the same. I mean, the same as Tip said throughout, because even that, it was so confusing for me. And again, I do want to step back to a meeting we had where we said out loud, and Mayor Pro Tem said it so perfectly, is when I see that sign, Manitou, I want to know that I am no longer in this other town that we butt up to. I'm in Manitou, and how do I know that? Because I can see the mountains, I can see the foothills. I don't have this concrete canyon of urban sprawl. I don't have the light pollution that goes with it and all of the sustainability issues. And so I think that if to Tip's point, speaks to all of the goals. So I think that for ease, if we want to make it easy, we just say, in this commercial district, this is as tall as your building can be. And there are some lessons learned in town, and we can go, okay, well, those are going to be the outliers, and okay, we can live with that. But I just really, I feel like this is critical. This is critical mass for me, because I'm asking myself, wow, do I want to move to Estes Park now if this is going to be, I mean, like, what is my plan B? Because that's why we live here. And, welcome to Manitou Springs. I don't want people to go, oh, well, this looks just like downtown Colorado Springs. We might as well stay at the Holiday Inn there because, it's cheaper. Or Denver. We can go to Denver and do some more activities. So if we're going to keep Manitou unique, this is the one way that we're going to pull that off.
Thank you. Julie?
Yeah, I think there was so much public outcry when this new hotel started getting built, and I felt guilty. I mean, I felt badly because I was on the planning commission and I was forced to approve it because it complied with the law as much as I hated the law. And so I think the general attitude, and I don't know what feedback you've been getting from whomever has been feeding you what they think Manitou wants to see. That's a complete mystery to me on who have you been getting feedback from other than our former planning director and probably our city administrator. But I think the word on the street, or the general consensus is, and certainly my personal opinion, is that I am not interested in raising the height just so we can have 9-foot ceilings. I don't like the fact that the Holiday Inn practically sits on the sidewalk. I think we need bigger setbacks out front. We need lower heights. And if all of these different overlays and all these different zones gives us an excuse to make more height and fewer setbacks in certain areas, then I'm against it. So when I see all of this about, reducing the setbacks and increasing the height, I'm like, who hired you? Whose side are you on? Who's talking to you? Who's making these recommendations? I mean, I understand the URA because they want to have big buildings there, which I don't. And they don't live here, those people. They're just paid to be URA directors, so, or whatever they are. So I think the general attitude in town is we don't want these big heights. We don't want more height. We want bigger setbacks, not bigger heights. So it's really upsetting to see all these height increases and setback reductions and everything. I'm with Tip. This is not what I've been waiting 10 years for. We need to make things better, not worse, and I don't want this to look like Colorado Springs right down on Cascade Avenue with the big towering hotels right up to the sidewalk.
Let's see, Denise had her hand up, then David, and I'm going to propose we take a break here after those two comments. So Denise?
Yeah, I just want to make a point of clarification. As Julie, I have not been giving any direction. So I think that's really important to say that publicly. This is not mine. What you have tonight on here is what you currently have in the code, and this is for a conversation. And so we're asking what you want, along with the only thing that was really mentioned is that, do you want to go 25 or 27 because of a 9-foot ceiling? Those are the type of things, but I will not be accused of giving direction because I have not done such.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, Julie, that's the kind of emotional reaction which concerns me. I don't know exactly what the street thinks, and I don't think you do either. I live in a historic house, which is quite tall. I was looking at the ceiling on the first floor just yesterday, it's 10 feet. It was built in 1890. The top 2 floors are 9 feet ceiling. It's a contributing building to the historic district. to me, that's the essence of Manitou. And I think to argue that any increase in height is destructive of Manitou's character is simply misguided.
All right, thank you. With that, let's take a 15-minute break. See you at 8 o'clock.
I guess I should stand up a little. I don't realize when I sit for that long. Fortunately, I got out for a walk today. Came here for a meeting and forgot my power cord. You know what? I'm gonna take a walk back. Where are you staying? No legal? No legal one. It's actually a historic building down right across from the new park. Down on the side of our one by the post office? Right by the big hotel. Oh, okay, so it's a little bit beyond that. So it's the park right down on the side. I can't remember. Okay, so it's right across the street from that old barn. And it's, I like to rent places, stay places that are within walking distance. So I try to. What's the most yeah, you know, this was perfectly fine. It was a little hot. I feel like they underrepresented kids. Overrepresented them, those domestic groups. Yeah. You know, it looks like all sweet and cute, and then I opened the door and I was like, oh, it's a motel six. Yeah, when we bought our house, they're dog friendly, so. Oh, okay, yeah. Before closing, I had my dog, so I stayed there with my kids. Yeah. And it was breakfast. I mean, it was, yeah, it was, but yeah. It's like, that's part of why I remember now because it's like, I brought my parents down. My parents were retired. They're going to Manatee for a couple days, and I was like, sure, this is a couple days. I said, can we come with you? Sure, why not? They brought our dog. Yeah, that's. We all stayed at the source house. Yeah, it is, yeah. And then they were jealous when I showed them. Now next time, can't you get something a little fancier for us? Yeah, do a little more. You know, their place to go that's like dog friendly and nice is Keithley Cabin. Oh, okay. So the Keithley, it's in the log cabin district. Okay. And you can go stay. Yeah, so they rent them out, and I think you can have a dog there. And they're like, oh, I parked on the log cabin. I will try that. Like I said, I'm trying to find different places because then I get a different perspective. I'm like, yeah, this is such a walk. Well, even hike. No, I live over in Crystal Hills. So on Saturday, I had friends, my friends came to town, and we did the 3.5-mile hike over the mountain down in the Brook. Okay. Yeah, we need it. Crystal Hills is one area I haven't driven around and don't get much detail. Yeah. I hear a lot about that area. So one of the interesting things is okay. And you can see the houses as they're built up against the hillside, like I'm for the action. Okay. And you can see like they did the thing where they talk about the median height of the park from measuring the maximum height. My house is 60 feet tall. Okay. See that kind of, it's funny how these things it's funny to think about this from the fifth floor. Yeah. Right, and then you'll see all those houses along there that are up against the ridge behind the bottom of the road. You can see all of the different heights. That'll be good. The other thing we talked about was the yeah, like I know there's one that's on the couch, it's 20 and it's 3 stories. But because it's up against the ridge, it's not obscuring any view because the houses are above it. Right. So the houses behind me, like I built the deck halfway right on the back ridge. Okay. So I built a 12 by cocktail deck. Okay. Halfway. Well, I haven't your house. I tell you what. You research. Right, that's right. Do you ever feel like people that are above you are like? No, see, they're back. They're back. Uh-oh, do we need to? I don't really have any more slides to present.
May I clarify something
Yeah, Denise, please go ahead.
if we're ready to start?
Yeah, if we could grab our seats, please, and we'll get started again. Okay, Denise, if you want to clarify something for us?
Yeah, I think I want to clarify, as I mentioned, many of these things we did not get to vet yesterday, right? So, and that's why I was concerned about even conversations of, the group hadn't vetted, it hadn't really gone through the process yet. And so we appreciate, and we've heard, I think you've heard, everybody's heard, height variance is very important, setbacks are very important. We did some examples, but these had not been vetted. So we appreciate your perspective and your comment. And some of this, as you see, is existing, so it's what's in there now. And you may be saying, hey, we don't like this, there's other things. The thing that the group even talked about yesterday is really going out and doing site visits and driving the city and looking at different things as they do this. So I just want to share, this hasn't been vetted, it hasn't been gone through the entire process at this point. We heard you. We want to make sure that you know that we've heard you, and we'll work on that as we go forward. Many of the people that's going to be on this group is here. They've heard that, and we'll continue to manage that accordingly. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Jen, if you'd like to take over where we left off?
Well, it appears that my PowerPoint has timed out, but that was my last slide. So if you want me to get back up and turn it back on, I can. But
No, I guess if that was your last slide,
yeah,
there's
the
not.
next slide was just let's discuss next steps. So, and I
Okay.
think we've kind of already discussed that we're going to work on this, developing this working group. And my only point of clarification, and I think Denise already asked this, but I just want to be clear, we'd had a meeting in November and a meeting in December kind of penciled in. It sounds like we will not have those meetings. We'll move forward with getting this working group together. We'll continue to work on some documents and some graphics and some information to pull forward to that working group. And then I suppose in January, when we have our full work plan together, we'll kind of re-engage and move forward from there.
Well, I think that makes sense. I'm sorry, Tip, did you have a comment? You go ahead, Tip.
I was just going to say, I wonder, I think this is a good way forward. Is it possible, and I know it would be, you guys are really open, to send the planning commission the steps along the way so that then we can also, give our views to our city councilors too?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, any additional discussion? Is there any objection to what Jen's proposed? Nancy?
I just, in the weekly report or email updates, kind of where you are in, I think January is a good time to come back with the work plan. But in the next 2 months, I always like to see little mini updates, just so I feel good about what's happening.
What if we did minutes after each one and I send those out, and we can even post them
Yeah.
online?
Yeah,
Would
yeah.
that be helpful?
Judith?
I do have one more comment, and this was based on something that Commissioner Delwich said at the last meeting that I thought was really important, and he may be able to speak to it better than I can, but he mentioned that when you have two different zones, say commercial and residential, the more restrictive zone requirements need to prevail. And I saw several places in the document where you kind of flirted with it, but I would like to have that very concise language. I'm just going to give you an example, so if we need to discuss it more. On page 27, commercial development shall be located and designed so as to minimize conflict with adjacent residential and historic areas. I don't know what that means, minimize conflict. And again, it comes up a couple other times. I want specific language that states, the more restrictive zone requirements prevail. And of course, we used the Beckers Lane townhomes last time as an example for the setback between the commercial, the townhomes and the residential property. And in that instance, the commercial setback prevailed when, in fact, the residential setback would have been the better choice than that. So I just want, certainly we can discuss it, but that was something that I thought was really worthwhile to add.
Tip?
Just to follow up with another example, I'm a historian, so we always have lots of examples. But to illustrate this point, you mentioned Beckers. Years ago, over a decade ago, when there was a planned development in one of our four major, what is it called, areas that would be really ripe for creative, interesting development. It was between Park Avenue and Grand Avenue. And the plan was to have a very massive building all along Grand facing the neighborhood. And they were going to minimize, take advantage of the minimal setback. And some people in the neighborhood went and measured the setbacks of all the properties, and it was totally, they were like 30 or 30 feet or 35 feet compared to this huge, massive 5 feet. And in the Planning Commission and the City Council, there was very little receptivity to talking about that because under the letter of the law, that was permitted. And so just to get to your point, Judith, I think that to have more carefully crafted language would be very helpful to make sure that the residential neighborhoods are not impacted so negatively.
Good, thank you. Other questions or comments? Okay, I guess, well, since we did a lot of homework and we saw some interest in trying to pursue some other ideas, maybe I should ask if there are other topics that anyone would like to go over tonight. It looks like a lot of the direction is falling to the working group. But if there's still concerns that you would like to discuss tonight, this would be a good time to say it. Julie?
I don't know if this is the right time or if we're going to have correspondence later, but I'd like to see a moratorium. I'd like it to be on the agenda for us to be allowed to vote on a moratorium of new construction and new commercial construction, because until we get this code updated, I don't want to see new buildings coming in, just like the Holiday Inn, that are, you know, if somebody submits an application today for a commercial zone, it's my understanding that they get to use the code as it now exists, even if we change it and pass the law tomorrow. So that's, so I'd like to see that on the agenda, if we could do that for next week. If 4 council members are would like to see it on the agenda, we can put it on the agenda. However, we've got really tight agendas for now till the end of the year. I know
Although-
it's
I
tight,
know.
John. Can I just put in my plug, though?
No,
Do you know how you're going to feel if that La Fun Hotel, if there's a thing submitted tomorrow for there to be a big damn hotel, just like right up to the sidewalk, just like the Holiday Inn? You're not going to like that. And then we're going to tell the public, oh, sorry, we were busy with other stuff. I don't care if it requires an emergency meeting at midnight. I'd like to have a quick vote. It doesn't have to be debated for hours. It's not complicated like the code. But I'd like us to be able to vote on that moratorium. But if you're saying we need 4 people to approve it tonight, before you'll put it on the agenda for Tuesday?
Well, okay, I mean, and actually during council correspondence, I want to talk a little bit about Tuesday,
Okay.
because, I mean, it's a busy agenda. I mean, the fact that we're, now taking 2 work sessions that we'd, allocated, this topic to, and we're transferring that workload to a different group, we've got some bandwidth to discuss things. So, I mean, no, if council has a sincere interest in this, I want us to be able to entertain it, but to be able to say we wanted to do something this next week, or we want to do that. I mean, last week it was, the topic of the hour was, let's increase the marijuana taxes. And yes, I think that's something that should be discussed, but we need to do some research.
Time is of the essence.
What?
Time is of the essence, as they say. That means we're in a big rush, because if we do nothing, we're going to get really screwed. So that's why I think it should be done immediately. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, let's go back to the topics we've dealt with tonight, and we'll come back to the moratorium question in a little while. Anything more anybody wants to talk about tonight relative to this free zoning effort? Okay, I don't see any interest. So, okay, Jen, thank you very much. Thanks for what you've done. For those of you in the audience that have stepped up to the plate, we appreciate it. Thank you very much. And we'll look for good things, I guess sometime in January. Probably before that, but certainly in January.
Great. Thank you guys again for
Oh.
all the great feedback and conversation.
Great, thank you. Mike?
Can I just make one comment before we leave?
Sure.
I just want to remind the group that consultants don't make decisions. They seek information from people like us. And last night, I apologized to Jen, for me personally, for the verbal assault that she had in the last meeting. And I would encourage you to, whenever anybody is verbally assaulting anybody, to feel free to jump in.
Right, thank you. Okay, I think that takes us to council correspondence. And, okay, thank you. And actually, thank you, planning commission members. If you'd like to step out, we'll give you a minute.
Actually, 11:30 works great for me, because I think I have a 10 to 11 meeting. Okay. Yep, that sounds great. Awesome, have a great evening. You too. Or you're spending the night in the tomorrow.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on to council correspondence. Yeah, I'd like to talk just a little bit about the agendas that we have between now and the end of the year. And I guess it's loosened up a little bit insofar as we had planned to do a work session on November the 30th devoted to the zoning rewrite, and then again on December the 14th. And so it's lightened up a little bit. But we have quite a lot. We have, I mean, for instance, next week, which is a concern to me, it's, just to read it off here for you, rezoning by Planning Commission. This has to do with Higginbotham Flats. The library, a final decision. Consideration to Hiawatha Gardens Task Force resolution. PPACG, PPRTA voting document. Mobility and parking enterprise. Employee handbook adoption. And then there'll be a memo relative to an executive session matter. That will just be a memo. That, just guessing at the times, we're looking at it close to, well, a little over 3 hours, closer to 3.5 hours.
What if we move the parking enterprise? There's nothing urgent about that. Why don't we just push that ahead so that we
Well-
can take 5 minutes and vote on whether we agree to a moratorium on commercial development till the code is done being redone?
John, if I
Okay.
could,
Yeah.
I would, although I have no problem looking at a moratorium next week is too soon. I think we need to give, the packet is due tomorrow, and it would take some work to have something like that ready. And so I would not agree to it being on next week's agenda.
Yeah, I think that doesn't really give us a chance to, it doesn't give staff a chance to respond.
I do agree with it being on a agenda in the near future.
I consider it an emergency. The LaFawn is going to get sold in a minute. Do you want to have another hotel right up against the sidewalk like we have already across the street? It'll look horrible. They'll look like matching towers. But, okay.
Well, no, I guess, I understand, Julie. I understand. What we typically do is we ask Jeff Parker to weigh in on everything. So it seems to me like, I mean, if I were a developer and I were going to buy the LaFawn lot and you shut me out, I'd be here with my lawyer and I'd be suing the city left, right. I'd take every last drop of blood if I could, if that was going to be my situation.
I don't know what you're talking about with the last drop of blood, but I do know that we put a moratorium on the short-term rentals. It was simple and easy, and Jeff told us clear as a bell that it was perfectly legal to do because we had a good reason, which was that the short-term rental code was in the middle of being rewritten. And we didn't want to allow any more short-term rentals until we finished rewriting the code. And at the time, there was an application that had already been submitted for a short-term rental. And Michelle explained to us, Michelle Anthony from planning, that, oh yeah, and then Jeff said, oh yeah, she's right, that the person who submitted that application gets to have the old code applied even if they don't start building right away or doing their business right away. So it's not a big deal, and it's up to you. I mean, I've made my pitch, you know.
Okay. Julie, you're pretty damn condescending. You are offensive. Excuse me. 5-minute recess.
What was the condescending part?
We also put a moratorium on e-bikes and scooters, and there was also an application that was already in. So I think there is precedent. I don't think it's so urgent that it has to be on next week. I think there are some things that are on this agenda coming up that aren't so critical that we can't move it around. But also, if we have to get these things done, I think that maybe we need to look at a special session.
Yeah, maybe we need a special session so we don't have to stay here till 11 o'clock.
I again would just ask that we not put it on next week's agenda, that we can put it on as soon as possible within the month is fine, but not next week. That's all. That would be my recommendation.
Okay,
because-
well, I guess we can vote on it next week because we can't vote on anything tonight anyway.
Well, I think if we can get some direction. I mean,
Mayor, what if if I may I speak? I'm sorry.
yeah, go ahead, please.
What if, let me go back and talk to planning and Jeff Parker and see if we could get this ready for November 16th with all the information. And I can let council know, maybe not tomorrow, but on Thursday after I have a conversation, just to make sure we have everything, if that would work.
Anybody have any objection to that?
I do.
And what is your objection?
My objection is if we wait that long, we might be sorry. I don't think it's necessary to wait that long.
I support.
I think it's very urgent. I think it can be handled in 10 minutes, and if necessary, I propose that we have an emergency meeting. That's my position.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem?
No, I would support that if we get something by the 16th, that's plenty of time. I've seen some stuff for the URA, and it's not that I have maybe some information that others don't have that I should or shouldn't have, but I don't think it's that urgent. Because I attend the URA meetings.
Right, yeah, you have background information. Councilor Chandler?
I'm okay with the 16th.
I'm okay with the 16th.
We can discuss it on the 16th. That gives, excuse me, Steve, sorry. 16th, okay. So we'll put it on the 16th. And Denise, if you'll check with staff or the city attorney, whoever we need to get necessary background. Okay. Okay, anything else for council correspondence? Julie?
I spoke with Steve Wood. You know, he's the artist who coordinated and supervised the fence, or you want to call it the cage, around the Soda Springs Park pavilion, you know, the stage. And he said he was really disappointed because when he first finished that project, he was assured that the space inside would be available to the public from time to time and not just on special events when there's a concert or something like that. And so he wanted to know if council would consider, and it doesn't even have to be on a regular schedule, but just, you know, opening up, unlocking the gates, like on the weekends, on a nice sunny day, or just for people to be able to stroll through so it doesn't look like this cage. And I told him, he said, even if it's just Saturdays and Sundays, what if it's 9 until dark? I mean, and he said, I know there were problems before with people defacing the property and worse, but that was a long time ago, and he wanted to see if council would consider opening that space up for more public use. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor, I can respond to that if you would
Okay,
like for me
please.
to, or I can wait, however you would like to do that.
No, go ahead.
He and Danu also reached out to Skylar, myself, and Roy, and we are opening it up on weekends and even during the week, and we're managing it accordingly. So I don't remember the exact hours, but yes, it is being opened up at this point, and we're checking for cleaning. Some of the issues that happened before we're watching for, which is needles, et cetera, and the public safety. So we are looking at it and trying it on a trial basis right now.
Okay, thank you. Judith?
Just to report that OSAC, we had our regular meeting and our annual retreat yesterday, last evening, and we spent some time going over our accomplishments, their accomplishments for 2021 and goal setting for 2022. And I just want to give a shout out to our city administrator for moderating the meeting. It was incredibly productive, well organized, and we got a lot done, and I thought a really reasonable amount of time. So well done, really well done meeting. Thank you.
Good. Anything else? Okay. Steve, sorry.
Yeah, I don't know if everybody saw the article in the Gazette about the bar trail, but Skylar Beck is arranged a meeting for this Thursday to be brought together, the Forest Service, Renfee, Colorado Springs. And it's going to be a very good meeting, I think. And I'm going to participate over Zoom. So I'm very pleased with that. Thanks.
Okay, what time is that, Steve?
It's 11
11
to 12,
11 to 12, Thursday.
Thursday.
Okay, and will that be?
It's about the first 2 miles of the bar trail.
Okay, but where will the meeting be?
Zoom.
Okay, Zoom, okay, all right. Okay, good, thank you. Denise, do you have anything?
I really don't. I will tell you that I think if everything moves as planned, we'll probably have 2 electric bikes for the police department this year. So we're working on it. They've tested some things. They're moving forward. And I know they're working on some training. So we're really trying to see, we're getting a really good deal if everything moves as planned. So I don't want to jinx it or whatever word I can use, but it looks like we will be moving forward with that.
Good, thank you. If there's nothing else, we'll stand adjourned.
If everybody could grab their thing and just put it in here and zip it up, that would be very helpful. It would help us, because I don't want to say. And just leave everything else as is, because I'm not saying tonight. I'm sorry, what? And leave everything else as is, I'm not cleaning up tonight. But if we can just get those